Welcome to The Secret Mind. Today we're continuing with Every Man an Enemy, and we're doing chapter 5, and this is the one that introduces the character which stuck in my mind for many, many years since I read this book, or several decades ago, which I thought was a brilliant reference to a character. I've just had a quick glance through and he appears, I think, towards the end of this chapter. This is chapter 5 of Every Man an Enemy by W. Howard Baker. When a British newspaper runs a campaign, it does it thoroughly. Nothing is left to chance. Within days, even a dim-wit in Doggy, a district of Middlesbrough so named for reasons best known to its 25,000 inhabitants, must appreciate that something is going on. The Post is a British newspaper, and its campaigns are no exception to the general rule. Consequently, it was not long before the question was being faced fairly and squarely at breakfast tables as far apart as Tiverton and Tynemouth, Tunbridge Wells and Torbay. Who is MacDonald Hall? From this question, it was but a short step to another, where is MacDonald Hall? And an even shorter step to the third and last question posed in the very same issue of the Daily Post. Why doesn't MacDonald Hall come forward to claim his thousands? Foul play? After that, something was bound to happen. Perhaps not what Kirby and everyone else concerned with the Daily Post campaign had expected or hoped for, but something. And it happened to Harvey Innes, of course. His name and business address had been prominently featured throughout the campaign in the press. And what happened first was the man with the 7 o'clock face. He wouldn't give his name to Dolores, Harvey Innes' blonde maid of all work. It might be admitted here, and inconsequentially, that the term maid, when applied to Dolores, is something of a misnomer. She was, and she wasn't. And Harvey Innes was grateful. It kept his mind off his landlord and all the rest of the Greeks. But what she was, and she wasn't, made no difference at all to this caller. He just insisted that he had to see Mr. Innes, and that he had to see him right away. It was about that piece in the paper, he said. Dolores didn't like the look of him. He was real sinister, if you asked her. And afterwards, she repeated this judgment ad nauseum, whether you asked her or not. He looked, well, peculiar. That was her considered opinion. He looked like he was half asleep, like he hadn't woken up properly. Heavy-lidded eyes, a sort of empty expression. It was Kirby, when he met him, who summed that expression up in a nutshell and coined a memorable flat phrase. This was the man with the 7 o'clock face. But that was in the future. For the present, Dolores contented herself with tugging her very tight skirt down to within an inch of her dimpled knees and scurrying into Harvey Innes' office and trying to tell him by sign language what was in store for him. The walls were paper thin, and that was when the man himself entered without knocking, and pushed her aside. No gentleman, obviously. Innes? The word bubbled out sleepily. The eyes above the slack, twitching mouth were completely blank. Harvey Innes was alarmed. He'd seen too many old American gangster films on TV not to be. Men like this generally appeared in the middle of reel 6 just before the cat food commercial and left a swathe of corpses behind them. He swallowed. Stiff upper lip. Go on, Harvey. Be British. Whatever the cost. Yes? You know what I've come about. The girl told you. The man with the 7 o'clock face made it sound like an accusation, whilst his dead eyes brooded over her thin figure. Yes? Harvey Innes' voice was near to a squeak. His collar felt as though it were choking him. His stiff upper lip was suddenly flabby. Then it came. And this was the bombshell, limply falling out of a wet and slack mouth. Innes, that piece in the paper said you wanted to see me. It did? Harvey croaked. Innes, said the man with the 7 o'clock face, in a voice as cold and as clammy as the freshly turned earth in some mouldering graveyard. I am MacDonald Hall. To begin with, Harvey Innes didn't believe it. He refused to believe it. This man, the author of 6 Pillows to Midnight. This man, the heir to thousands of pounds in pre-publication royalties. Impossible. If he told Harvey that he wished to dispose of all rights in an autobiography entitled I Was a Middle-Aged Ghoul, the agent would have done something about it. Immediately. He would have looked at the man's dead face and seen truth there. But this monster, this horror, responsible for a fine, sensitive first novel like 6 Pillows to Midnight, Harvey thought he might just as well lay claim to being the missing author himself. This zombie, MacDonald Hall, it wasn't believable. All the same, the man was obviously not one to be trifled with. He was some kind of crank, and if appearances could be relied on at all, he was dangerous with it. It might be best to humour him, Harvey thought sickly, at least for a while. So Harvey smiled, what he hoped was a winning and ingratiating smile. It looked ghastly. Won't you sit down, Mr. Hall? He got out, and then, oh, Dolores. He wanted to tell her to stay here and engage the man with the 7 o'clock face in conversation, whilst he got help, or simply got out of the building. But he wasn't given the opportunity. His visitor pulled up a chair close to Harvey's desk and effectively blocked off his only possible line of escape. Then, as Harvey hesitated, desperately wondering how to put what he wanted Dolores to do into words, the man with the 7 o'clock face said rather curtly, "Leave us, young woman, we have things to discuss." Dolores went gladly. Harvey Innes watched her go with infinite reluctance. His visitor leaned forward. "Now," he said, and his breath fanned Harvey's cheek. Dead breath, stale breath, breath of decay. "Now, when do I get my hands on the money?" "It's not quite as simple as that," Harvey began, his voice quavering up and down through half an octave. "No?" His visitor's voice suddenly became ominous. "No? And why not? It's mine, isn't it?" "First," Harvey said weakly, smiling nervously at the same time and developing a twitch in the process. "First, there's the matter of proof. I told you my name. I wrote that book, see? But can you prove that you wrote it? I can get 4 people to swear affidavits that did. That good enough for you? If it isn't, I can get more. 5, 6, 7 even." The man relapsed into brooding silence, looking inwards. "They'd better swear," he said suddenly. Harvey Innes felt his blood run cold. "So there you are," the man said, brightening a little. "There you are. There's my proof. When do I get the money?" "It might be necessary to do more than that," Harvey Innes made the suggestion hesitantly. "It might be necessary to prove that you know what the book is about." "But everybody knows that. It was in the papers," the man rejoined scornfully. "Yes," Harvey agreed sadly. "Yes, it was." The Post, to lend point to its story, had presented its readers with an outline of the novel, and few suitably sex-sodden passages just as an hors d'oeuvre. "What kind of proof is that, then?" the man with the 7 o'clock face demanded. "What good would it be if I could tell you the whole story 10 times over?" "No good at all." Harvey pressed on. "But if you wrote the novel, you must have some documentary proof that you wrote it, a carbon copy, for instance." "I don't bother with carbons." "I don't bother with carbons," the man returned briefly. Then he added darkly, "I think you're just wasting time." Harvey was saved from having to answer this accusation by the sound of the telephone bell shrilling in the outer office, and by the sound of Dolores' voice rising high. Who did you say?" "Oh, yes. Do come round." "Who's that?" the man with the 7 o'clock face demanded suspiciously. "Who's coming round?" Harvey didn't know, but he hadn't long to wait to be able to provide an answer. The door of his office came open quickly. Dolores stood there, an excited Dolores. "You heard that, Mr. Innes? Did you hear that? Who was it?" "MacDonald Hall," said Dolores, fixing the man with the 7 o'clock face with a very mean eye. "And he's coming round right away." So the nightmare began. First one MacDonald Hall, and then another, and another, and another, and another. 5 MacDonald Halls in all, 4 men and 1 woman, all claiming to have written 1 book, all after the loot, the advance royalties. They phoned in, they came in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. From being an agent in search of an author, Harvey Innes had now become a man with too many. 5 authors, 1 book, which was the true one. It might even have been a comic situation if Harvey hadn't needed money so desperately himself. If he hadn't needed money and been unable to get to grips with a penny of the money he needed until the real author of 6 Pillows to Midnight was found. Until the real author was identified and the final contracts were signed, there would be no commission for Harvey Innes. Until the right man or the right woman had scribbled his or her name at the foot of a sheet of legal parchment, John Bovis couldn't publish the book, and the Post couldn't run the serial. These were excellent reasons for Harvey to treat this as a very serious matter indeed. There was one reason more. A reason, a feeling, he couldn't accurately define. It was as though for a moment he'd been allowed to look into the future and to catch a small glimpse of the trouble and the horror that awaited him there. 5 authors, 1 book. Unaccountably, Harvey shivered. He had a premonition of evil. Certainly, there was nothing at all for him to grin about in this. See you tomorrow.